I want to go over a basic concept that's just so important, but it's one that we can hear over and over and over and over again and really put the pieces together. I learned this, or we learned this from Harvo Hendricks. Harvo Hendricks is a guy that did a lot of work with married couples. He invented this therapy called imago therapy. And he had all kinds of unique theories. One of his theories was that if we have unresolved wounds that we've carrying from our life, whether it's childhood, adolescence, or adulthood, if we have some wounds that are unresolved, that we will, when we meet someone that will trigger those wounds, that's when we fall in love. This is a pretty interesting theory. So the infatuation experience is actually, in his view, is about someone that will actually trigger these wounds so that they'll come to the surface and I'll have a chance to work with them, which is a pretty interesting theory. But I don't know if I fully buy into that one, but I did buy into this one. He said he talked a lot about wounds and the impact that it has on relationships. He said, "Do you know your wounds have no sense of time, that any wounding that we've had, whether it's in the womb, after we've been born, whether it's 5 years old, whether it's 10 years old, whether it's 20, 30, or yesterday." He said, our wounds have no sense of time, that they can be activated and be just as vibrant as they were when we originally internalized them. It's a pretty astounding thing. So that explains that. I mean, we like to use the language wounded child because oftentimes when we get triggered, that wound comes to the surface and it feels familiar to a particular age that I was when that happened. And so, and I start to move back into that consciousness. So it's kind of a regressed state. And so that was the first thing. It was a big light bulb. It was like, wow, our wounds have no sense of time. And then the second part that we got from that was that our wounds think symbolically, that there are symbols that can occur that can bring the wounds to the surface. So you have the combination of, all right, well, I have this issue about, just say, being mistreated by a male authority. And I have a wound that was when I was, you know, 8 years old, 9 years old, and I was treated in a very horrible way by a male authority. And then it could be 5 years later, 10 years later, 20, 30 years later, I get into a situation where I'm dealing with an issue where I feel mistreated or abused, if it's an extreme thing, by a male authority. And everything that's been internalized around that wound, even though the face is different, even though the person is different, even though that symbol gets triggered, and all of a sudden it comes flying to the surface and I'm overwhelmed. And I have to deal with, at that moment, the situation that I'm in, but I also have to deal with the old wound that's coming up at the same time.
Right.
And that's why it becomes over what?
Whelming.
Overwhelming. It becomes over. It's too much
Right.
to handle, or it feels too much to handle. And then someone from the outside might be looking at that and saying, I know you're dealing with this problem with your boss,
Right.
but I don't understand why it's so debilitating
Right.
for
Or
you.
why it's such a big deal.
Why it's such a big deal? I don't either. Right? I don't either.
Why it's making me
It comes
like
up
feel like this.
emotionally. It comes up emotionally, but it doesn't come up intellectually.
Right.
It, so I feel it, but I may not always put the pieces together.
Right.
That's why it's beautiful to be proactive and do the work of the wounded child, because you're having an intellectual understanding of what's coming up emotionally. Therefore, you can contextualize it and actually work with it.
Right.
And so it's a very important thing is that it's unrealistic to think that we will never be triggered.
Yeah.
The best we can do is I know and I understand my triggers and my sensitivities. And when they come to the surface, I also know what to do with them.
Right.
When they do get triggered, I have some skill inside of me to separate, to work with it, to externalize it, to move down the healing continuum,
Right.
not ED, but healing continuum.
Right.
And I know what to do to work with it. So no sense of time.
Right.
And the symbols, thinking symbolically. Are you ready for a journey of self-discovery and healing? Introducing A Roadmap to the Soul, a practical guide to love, compassion, and inner peace. This book offers practical tools and insights to navigate your inner landscape, release emotional blockages, and embrace your authentic self. Start your transformational journey today by getting your copy now. See the link in the description. And now, back to the lesson. Puts a lot of pieces of the puzzle together.
Right.
Gives us a lot of context. And, you know, the easiest thing is to draw upon my relationship with my primary caretakers.
Yeah.
In the positive and the negative,
Yeah.
right? And so, okay, so issues with or relationship with dad or lack of relationship and how that can
affect me,
right?
Yeah, I'll go.
Yeah.
Well, this can be taught a million times. So this is a good lesson. When people come to me, it's like there's a missing piece sometimes. Well, always when they come, because something's wrong, right? You don't just go for no reason. So I always tell them, you're like a puzzle, right? And you see this beautiful cover, right? When you buy the box, and it has lots of pieces, and you go to put the puzzle together, and you're doing great. And then all of a sudden, there's like the puzzle is like kind of done, but something just doesn't feel right because some of the pieces look exactly the same, but they're in the wrong spot. So what I always tell people is that you are already whole. All your pieces are there. And the puzzle is so beautiful. But we just have some pieces that are in the wrong spot. We didn't realize. So what Dean's talking about is like taking the puzzle. We're not taking the whole thing apart, I mean, I'm looking at Anna. Oh, I don't know a lot about you, Anna, but I do remember them saying that, if I'm correct, you can say yes, that you were the leader of an organization of women. Okay. So obviously Anna has some skills if you're going to lead a whole bunch of women in this organization, right? So we're not taking that piece of the puzzle apart. That works. She's got those skills. She's able to work in that. Now, I'm not saying that Anna never gets triggered, okay, and may have to do some work on herself, in that she's in that arena. But as far as running that organization, she has the skills. Okay. So where you get to give yourself some kudos here is that there's a lot of things that you do very, very well. Yeah. And your true self has that. However, all of us have these wounds that we've been able to be highly functioning in our world, or you wouldn't be here, right? You'd be in the mental institution or you'd be homeless, okay? Because that's what happens when you become so triggered that you can't serve anymore. Like that's the people that Rhonda works with, like they've been so triggered in their life. They've been so wounded. They became very strong. And then they got more wounded, to where their protectors like, I don't even want to deal with society. Okay. I don't want to serve nobody. I'll only serve the people like me Because when you feed the homeless, you say, "Do you need any socks?" They'll say, "You know what? I'll take a pair, but Sam needs a pair." They never take two. They only take one for themselves and one for their friend. Okay? I'll take one for Sam. Now, if they want an extra brownie, they'll ask, "Can I have an extra brownie? Do you have enough, please?" But they ask, okay? So they're not greedy on that level, all right? When you're giving from God, they're not greedy at all. I know that. I've been with Rhonda. But in that they don't want to serve anymore, okay? And because they've become overwhelmed with their wounds, okay? That's an extreme case, but we all understand that feeling that you get overwhelmed, you've had enough. So, where the voices become so powerful is that you get to understand this is my issue. We'll take the boss. This is my issue with my boss. And then this is how this is the best question you can ask your wounded child. What does this remind you of? And if you call your wounded child by name, Molly, right? I got a Molly, right? Molly, what does this remind you of? If you call it by name, she'll answer or he'll answer. And all you have to do, and everybody in this program knows how to hear their thoughts. Okay, y'all all know how to hear your thoughts. There are some of us that, like if I'm dealing with somebody that's just coming, just getting sober, they react to their thoughts. They react to their feelings. And in sedation, they want to sedate it, okay? But you guys have been listening to your thoughts for a long time. The only difference that you're doing here is realizing which part of me has that thought. Which part of me believes that? And so that's when you're doing the dissection, which is, for me, the hardest one, because it's like, oh, who is that? Who is that? It's kind of scary. Who is that? But if you either have a belief, if you make it simple, you either have a belief system out of your wounds of your life. Like I have a wound in my life that when I was 8 years old, I was a little kid, like tiny, like skinny, scrawny. And when I went to my biological dad took us to Disney land, yeah, in California. And he rode with my sister on the big ride, the mountain ride. What was it called? Terrified of it.
Yeah.
The splash. It wasn't splash ride, but the big ride. And I was in a seat.
Space Mountain.
Space Mountain. Oh yeah, that was it. And then I was in the seat by myself. And I'm sure they strapped me in, but all I can remember is holding on for dear life. And my body kept coming up like this. And I was already physically and emotionally not safe in my world, with my family. And then I am like, I think I'm going to be thrown out of this thing. And to this day, I am terrified of rides. Yeah. I mean, at 64 years old, I understand this concept, but my wounded child, I am not getting on that ride. I don't care what you could give me my G-Wagon, you could give me the house I want, I'm not getting on that ride because the overwhelming fear in that arena is huge. So the way I handle that as a true self is I'm gonna get on the ride. My protector's like, we don't ride rides, okay? And she's not nice about it. We don't ride rides, okay? So it's like, but the wound came from that experience. Okay. So in that, and the terror was so strong that I can still feel it today. Like my heart is racing right now. And I'm 64 years old, people. Like I could fit in, look, I probably can't even fit in Space Mountain right now. The thing would be too tight. My boobs would not get over the Space Mountain thing, okay? So it's like, I'm sure I would not come out of the little thing, right? But for my protector, she's like, we ain't riding no rides. And my true self like, no, I don't ride rides. I don't ride rides, So what I want you to see is that by dissecting that, instead of me being like, what's wrong with you, Holly Cam? Like it really was terrifying.
Yeah. I want you to think about just what comes to mind as your top two symbols.
Oh, that's good, honey.
That you tend to react to. So it could be, the symbol could be a social situation. It could be
Mm-hmm.
doing a presentation. It could be
Mm-hmm.
relationship with male authorities or female
Mm-hmm.
authorities. It could be friendship. It could be marriage. It could be
Yeah.
communication. It could be money. It could be. Just think about what are your top two
Triggers.
triggers that you seem to get kicked into every once in a while.
Rejection. It's a great one too.
Rejection,
Yeah.
abandonment.
Moses is rejection.
Hmm.
Moses says he is he's a sharp kid, okay, and he's not afraid of man. So, I mean, that's a pretty good combination, right? And we asked him some. His boss told him something about selling, okay, like selling, and he said. I said, well, honey, why don't you want to sell? He goes, I've had enough rejection in my life and I'm not interested in any more. And because he's adopted, like he was rejected, from his
Right, right.
biological parents, right? That's his wound.
So, what would you say your top two triggers or what
Mm.
comes to mind?
Out of the 30, um, I would have to say betrayal.
Betrayal,
Hmm. And betrayal dealing with trust.
trust.
Yeah. Uh, and mm, it would be betrayal and trust.
Okay.
Yeah,
All right, good.
that would be it.
Are you ready to embark on a journey of personal transformation and inner healing? Our intensive online coaching program is designed for individuals and couples seeking to reconnect with their true selves. Dive into our lessons, activations, live coaching calls, and educational readings tailored to uncover limiting beliefs, healing emotional wounds, and to cultivate a life filled with authenticity. Transform yourself, transform your relationships. It's time to transform you. See the description below to see how to join Transform You.